Welcome to another edition of the Best Business Minds, where we interview business leaders and academics that write thought-provoking books. I'm Marc Kramer, a serial entrepreneur who consults with family businesses and entrepreneurs. This is our 123rd show. Today's guest is Michael Timms, author of How Leaders Can Inspire Accountability, 3 Habits That Make or Break Leaders and Elevate Organizational Performance. I love leadership books, love this book, think everybody should be reading this, and especially in college, an MBA program should have this as like a must read for these future leaders of companies and entrepreneurs. So, Michael, let's start with you telling us about your background.
Sure. Well, thanks, Mark, for that introduction. I think I wish I had this book earlier in my career. I wouldn't have made so many dumb mistakes. But so a little bit about myself. So my background is, so first of all, I am Canadian. I live in British Columbia, Canada, just kind of in a mecca for outdoor recreational activities. My background is in human resources. I actually, when I went to university, I got really interested in leadership. I read the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, loved it. And I was like, this is exactly what I want to be doing with my life, is teaching these kinds of principles. And so at the time, I was in finance. I graduated in finance. I did an MBA and specialized in HR, thinking that was going to get me closer to leadership development. But of course, once I got into human resources, it was all compensation and benefits and recruiting and things like that. And it wasn't until I had just kind of a string of really bad leaders. My bosses got progressively worse throughout my career. And until this last guy was just brutal. And that's when I decided, you know what, I'm going to go back to my first love, which is really leadership. And that's when I started my own business. And that was that was about 7.5 years ago. Haven't looked back.
Congratulations. And you're right about HR, that most CEOs don't see that HR should be like the mother of the company, grooming people to maximize their potential, grooming for future leaders, as opposed to reporting to the CFO and overseeing benefits and things like that. It's a total loss of real talent that can be developed. My sister's head of HR, and she's been lucky a couple of times reporting directly to the CEO and doing exactly what HR people should be doing. So good for you that you started your own venture.
Thank you.
How do you like being an entrepreneur?
It's great. It's not for everybody. Being an entrepreneur is so my wife, she works, she's an MRI technologist. And so she works in the hospital, and we comment several times about the different personality types. You know what? A lot of people just, they want it to be pretty clear about, hey, what am I supposed to be doing today? What are my responsibilities? They want that scope of responsibility very well defined. And I think there's a lot fewer of us that are okay with not having our scope of responsibility defined and just kind of deciding how we're gonna make money. But it is tough. I mean, for those people who are considering being an entrepreneur, it's tough, creating money out of thin air. And I used to not have respect for salespeople until I became an entrepreneur. I realized, oh yeah, nothing works until the money is coming in the door. So yeah, I love being an entrepreneur. It's great, but it's not for everybody.
Good thing that you have your wife as the counterbalance with the consistent income coming. It's a good way to be able to manage that.
Yeah, fortunately, we don't need to rely on that. It's great because we use her income as our vacation money. So so every time we're on vacation, the kids are thanking mommy for vacation.
Excellent. So why did you write this book?
I wrote it. It was interesting. So I started my career in my consulting practice. I focused on succession planning, which is really helping organizations create a pipeline of talent so that they don't have to recruit quite as often. and so that they can promote from within. And one of the very first things that I do with organizations to help them accomplish this is to identify leadership competencies. What does it take, and what are the behaviors that we're going to reward, and what are the behaviors that we need and want in our leadership, in our leaders. And so I would work with focus groups with various organizations, whether it's and I work with management, non-management focus groups, and I'd really just ask them, hey, what does it take to be a great leader? What are the behaviors that lead to successful outcomes? And the one behavior that kept coming up over and over and over again, or this attribute, is accountability. And it was interesting, it came up in different types of contexts. People kept saying great leaders have a high standard of personal accountability. B, great leaders are able to hold other people accountable in a supportive way. And C, great leaders are able to kind of create this environment, create the conditions that make it easier for everybody to take greater ownership of their work. And so with this kind of initial data that I kept gathering, and I literally heard that every single time I did a focus group, and I did dozens and dozens and dozens of focus groups with various organizations. Every single focus group would talk about accountability as a key leadership competency. And so I became really fascinated with this, and then I began researching and teaching about how to create a culture of accountability. And personal accountability is really the first step in creating that culture of accountability, which is what this first book is about.
Has the pandemic changed the way we look at leaders and what's expected of them?
You know, towards the beginning of the pandemic, I think a lot of people were freaking out about the remote workplace and how do we deal with this? How do we manage people when they're not physically there? And I was kind of scratching my head. I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, there's been a lot of organizations that already, including myself, have been working remotely for a long time. And I think what it just highlighted is a gap in basic management best practices. And if you have these basic management best practices in place, it doesn't really matter where people are working. And one of those key management best practices is the one-on-one weekly meeting with each individual member of your team. One-on-one meetings, that is a basic management best practice. And you know what, when you're doing that every week, meeting with each person individually on your team each week, it really doesn't matter where you're working. So I think it just exasperated a lot of, or just, I guess, highlighted some of the weaknesses in people's management approach. It's like, whoa, what I'm doing isn't working. It's this pandemic's problem. No, actually, you're just not applying basic common sense management practices, and the pandemic is highlighting that. So I think that's my perspective on the pandemic. If you're applying basic good practices, it shouldn't really impact how you lead your team.
Isn't it difficult, though, to build a corporate culture when people aren't actually in the same location? Like, I get it. I had a client of mine who ran an HR practice, and they were all individual people like yourself working with different companies. And so they're all essentially just different individuals, happen to be under one brand. And so you don't necessarily need to build a corporate culture. But in early stage companies or companies where bouncing things off of other people is really critical to them, what do you think about that? I mean, how do you build a corporate culture with so many people, especially the 21 to 35-year-olds really are enjoying the idea of not going into an office?
Yeah, I think that the tools that we have are good to facilitate teamwork. Small team, team work, and but there is something magical about getting everybody together in the same place, for sure. But I think that's that's an extra. I don't think that's essential for building corporate culture. I think one of the key things to build a corporate culture is to have a clear vision of where we're going, and to have the leadership continually communicating where we're going, and to continually requesting people's feedback and creating the dialogue. And that dialogue can happen online, but for sure there's an advantage when you actually get people together and there's this energy of having people in the same place at the same time that you don't get online.
I think a lot of the corporate leaders who are saying, oh, we need to get people back in, it's not about the corporate culture, it's about cracking the whip and making sure that the overseers are getting everybody to work. Like when the numbers aren't where they'd hope they'd be, even if the people are working hard, they feel like, well, if I can't see them and my managers can't see them, they must not be working. Of course, there's all kinds of software to follow if you're even touching your keyboard and all the other things that they can do. But I think that some companies are in a panic about what's been going on in the economy lately. And so hence they want to go and tighten everything that they go and do.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to, again, basic good management practices. If you are defining people, like if you are defining what people should be doing, say, hey, look, these are the basics, standards of performance. This is the kind of work that we would expect to get done in this kind of time frame. Do you agree? Is this a reasonable amount of work to get done in this kind of time frame? Sure. If you agree, okay, let's work towards that. And if we're meeting on a weekly basis, and if we have some sort of a mechanism to track the things that we're doing, then there really shouldn't be that need to, well, we got to get everybody in the office to make sure that they're working. I think that's just a crutch for poor management.
You always hear he or she is a born leader. Are certain people born to be leaders, or can people develop into being good leaders?
Well, I think that depends on how you define leadership. I think a lot of the way our brains work, the way that we have defined leadership in the past is, we see somebody who speaks the most, speaks the loudest, is the most certain of their decisions and makes decisions a lot and doesn't ask for a lot of feedback. And we say, that is a great leader, right? And that's kind of the way our brains operate. And like, wow, if they're confident, then they must know what they're doing. And I think that's the way that we have defined leadership in the past. But the way that I define leadership is leaders elevate others to accomplish a common goal. And when you look at leadership in that respect, I think that's the type of leader that we're looking for. Are people born or made? I think anybody can do that. Really, when you take a look at that definition of leadership, can you elevate others? And when we talk about elevating others, hey, can we help people leverage their strengths, focus on their strengths? Can you help people make decisions and exercise their agency? Can you help people grow and develop? Great. If you can, then you're elevating others. I think most of us can do that. Can you help others? Can you help others accomplish a common goal? Yeah, there's a certain number of behaviors that it takes to do that. So I think anybody can learn to be a leader. There are certain behaviors, there are certain skills that make it much easier to be a good leader. And I would say that the number one thing is that you want to improve, that you want to improve yourself, that you want to improve the world around you. If you don't want to improve yourself, and if you don't want to improve the world, then you're probably not going to be a great leader. Another key aspect that's going to be really difficult to be a good leader is if you fear conflict. If you can't handle having difficult conversations with people, if that really freaks you out, then either you need to really work on that, and if you don't think that you can get over that, please get out of leadership, because you're going to cause a lot of collateral damage.
At the start of the book, you picked one of your favorite leaders, President Lincoln. Please explain why and what we can learn from Lincoln. And I happen to love Lincoln. We talked about before this even started. Team of Rivals is one of my favorite books. So why did you pick Lincoln?
Oh, well, he was, he's just, I think, one of the standard, when we think of great leaders, great historical leaders, he's kind of one of the first people to come to mind. One of the reasons I think we see him as a great leader, I think initially, is because he accomplished some great stuff. I mean, if he didn't win the Civil War, and if he didn't end slavery, we might not think he was such a great leader. So I think the very first thing is he accomplished a couple of great things. But the other thing is, when you start to look at how he accomplished those great things, he accomplished it in kind of this counterintuitive way where, like I said, a lot of times we're looking at the leader who's the most confident, the loudest, the most outspoken, the most domineering. That was not Lincoln's style. Lincoln was very much about elevating others. And he was just so humble, almost to a fault. And I literally, there was a number of times where his humility actually kind of was a problem, because he let people walk all over him for a little bit too long. But one of the great things I think that we admire about Lincoln is, I think we recognize when people have great character. And we say, man, that, to do that is tough. And one of the things that you kept hearing about Lincoln is he's so gracious. And people would question him, like, why this person has been a political enemy to you for years. They have said terrible things about you. How could you consider, forming an alliance with them? And Lincoln says, I don't care what people have said about me in the past. I just care about if they will support me going forward, if they will agree to support me going forward. And he just didn't hold a grudge. And I think people really respect humility. I think people really respect graciousness when people are so willing to forgive others. And so those are some of the qualities that I think first of all, we say, well, he accomplished some great things. How did he do that? He was such a humble person with great character, that we kind of look at, we say, man, I wish I could be more like that. So I think that's why I highlighted Lincoln as one of a number of people that I highlighted in the book of being a great leader.
One of the things I've always heard a lot of great leaders say, and Lincoln, I did this, but they always question whether this was the right thing. A lot of leaders told me, who I've interviewed over the years, have said, the biggest fault I have is letting people stay in a position too long without pulling them out. And everybody says that, but I admire them all, because they said the fact is, you've given them every chance to succeed, and if they didn't, well, you've tried everything you could to make that happen. But if you pull people too quickly, the smartest people don't want to stay because they're afraid that any mistake, you'll decapitate them.
Exactly.
So
yeah.
I always think that's a smart move on their part.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that, because
Michael, in your consultations, is there any software application that has been helpful to businesses in helping their employees develop the 3 habits referenced in the book?
Software. That is a question I have not been asked yet. I haven't come across any software to help you develop the 3 habits. And maybe I better clarify for those listeners what those 3 habits of personal accountability are. Really, when you talk about, what does it take to be a great leader, to set a great example of personal accountability, believe it or not, you can actually boil that down to 3 habits. And those 3 habits are: number 1, don't blame. Blame kills accountability. It kills accountability in yourself, and it kills accountability in others, because nobody's going to want to take accountability if they think that they're going to be blamed for doing so. Habit number 2 is look in the mirror. And anytime that you come across a problem, the very first thing you should do, after not blaming, is to look in the mirror and acknowledge, hey, how may I have contributed to this problem? Because it gives you some leverage to create some solutions. And then the 3rd habit is to engineer the solution. Our gut instinct is to blame other people for problems and kind of focus solely on the people who are closest to the mess and blame them for it. But really, a lot of our problems are caused by poor systems. And poor systems encourage poor behavior or poor outcomes. And so the 3rd habit is take a systems approach and look at the systems and the processes that you have in place, and fix those first before trying to fix others. And really, you could boil personal accountability down to those three key behaviors. Your question was back to that software?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I haven't come across any software that has helped people live the 3 habits of personal accountability. I'll tell you what, there is one, not a software, but something if you're trying to practice and if you're trying to learn those 3 habits of personal accountability. One of the first things that I do with people that I'm teaching the 3 habits of personal accountability is I ask them to track for a week how often they're tempted to blame, how often they blame or are tempted to blame somebody for a problem. And I ask them to keep track of that. And when I follow up with them a week later, a lot of people are shocked at how many times that thought came into their head. As soon as they have a problem, that thought, oh, Mark must have done this if I'm having a problem, right? And that's not helpful. As a matter of fact, I've thought about this quite a bit. There are no positive benefits to blaming other people for problems. Nothing good comes from doing that. And as a matter of fact, it spawns a whole host of unproductive behaviors, both in yourself and in those who you're blaming. So no technology hack, but I'd say that's one quick little experiment that you can apply yourself to start to learn those 3 habits of personal accountability.
Is there any software training programs that you recommend? I think that goes along the lines of what he's asking. There's lots of different educational programs that companies use to teach different things to their employees. Is there anything in leadership that you said, God, this would be great? This is a great piece of software.
I'll tell you what, actually, my first book is about demonstrating personal accountability and setting a very high standard of personal accountability. The other way to create this culture of accountability is the way in which you hold others accountable. And I haven't written a book yet about that, but I teach about that. And there are 4 habits to do that. But one piece of software that we use in our organizations, and remember, what is the definition of leadership? My definition is leaders elevate others to accomplish a common goal. And one of the key pieces of software that we use is Trello. Trello is a very simple project management tool that helps us keep track of our work and accomplish a common goal. And so when it comes to holding other people accountable in a positive and a supportive way, I find that Trello is a very, very effective tool. So there you go. That's the closest thing I have to kind of a software hack to help you be more accountable.
So you mentioned Gandhi, Martin Luther King, Mother Teresa, Nelson Mandela, that they were approachable, humble, and put others' interests first. Without getting into the politics, what does former President Trump do as a leader that people are willing to follow him? And not just in the US, but I mean, he got the 2nd largest number of votes, even though he lost to Joe Biden.
Yeah.
And he is, looked up to around the world by a lot of different folks. So it seems he flies in the face against everything you write about in the book, and yet people follow him. Why is that?
Well, again, for your listeners, I got to give you a heads up. Mark said, "Hey, can I ask you this question?" I told him, no, I don't want to talk about Trump because I really don't have positive things to say about him. But then right before the show, I'm like, okay, fine, you can ask me
what can we learn from him that why people follow him?
So let's go back to the definition of leadership. My definition of leadership: leaders elevate others to accomplish a common goal. There's a difference between a leader and an influencer. And I think we have an overabundance of influencers in the world. Now, influencers, they don't really ask anybody to accomplish anything. And they're not always asking, and they're not always trying to elevate other people. And another aspect about kind of an implied part of that definition of leadership is that you're trying to make positive change. There are lots of people in the world who attract a lot of followers. And if having followers was the only qualification of leadership, Well, then by that standard, Trump would be a great leader because and so would Hitler, because he attracted a lot of followers as well. But one of the things is the difference between the way that Trump and kind of and the Hitlers of the world lead is that they attract people by inspiring hate, greed, self-centeredness, and elevating yourself above other people, which is the complete opposite of leadership. And they also encourage, and Trump was great at this, is that he encouraged other people. He gave permission really to the world, to the United States, to give into your most base human instincts. If you want to trash talk somebody, that's totally fine. If you want to take absolutely zero accountability for your actions, that's totally fine. And so that's attractive, right? If somebody in a leadership position is telling me that I can say and do whatever I want and there are no consequences, hey, sign me up, right? That sounds great. And I think that's why certainly Trump has attracted a lot of followers, but he's not inspiring any kind of positive change. He's mostly trying to just simply elevate himself. And I think the consequence and the fallout is a lot of inspiring negative change.
And yet there's a lot of people who follow them, and a fair number of really supposedly smart people that follow him. So, which makes interesting discussion for sure.
And by the way, and I just want to, and maybe I should have prefaced this. You know what? If you want to know my politics, I'm actually, I'd say, more conservative and more, if I was in the States, I'd probably be somewhat leaning, well, I would have used to be leaning into the Republican side of my political beliefs. So this has nothing to do with politics.
Yeah, of course.
It's simply the way that he leads. He's just a terrible, awful human being and a terrible leader.
Okay, on that note, so we asked the question, where have the great leaders gone? You asked that in the book. Are we lacking in leaders or just the wrong kind?
Yeah, and I think exactly what I said about Trump is really kind of what, we have, the internet is full of a lot of influencers. We have a lot of, people who have followers. If that was the only qualification of leadership, then we'd call them a leader. But like I said, they're not, a lot of influencers they're not trying to accomplish anything positive. They're not trying to uplift their followers. Their followers are just like, oh, that's cool. I want to be cool like them. So I'm going to purchase the same things, what they tell me to purchase. That's not leadership. So leadership is doing the hard things. Leadership is, and Simon Sinek is a great, he talks about this, about leaders go first. Leaders do the scary stuff first. They do the hard things first. They model the behaviors that they want to see in others, which is hard. It is hard to be a leader, and it is hard to always be modeling those positive behaviors that you want in your followers. So yeah, by my standard of leadership, the standard of leadership that I just shared with you, I think we're lacking. We have a lot of people in leadership positions that just simply lack the courage to do the hard things. It's easy to blame the economy when things are bad. It's easy to blame people in the company when they've made mistakes. That's why we're not performing. That's not leadership. It is really hard, and Lincoln did this as well, is to say, you know what, although this person on my team made a mistake, you know what, that's on me. That's my bad. As a matter of fact, actually, CEO of Shopify actually just did that. He just, I think last week, he just said, you know what, I took the company in the wrong direction. And that's the cause of these layoffs. These layoffs are a direct result of my decision, and it's totally on me. That is hard. And I think we have we have too few leaders who are willing to take those risks and do those hard things, to sacrifice their ego, to sacrifice, perhaps be willing to sacrifice their reputation to do the right thing.
Would even be better is if he took no salary or options while he was fixing this problem, and not took a salary after letting go people. So it'd be interesting to see what he actually does to make it more authentic. why do you write that picking leaders based on technical ability, tenure, or gut feel is a bad idea?
Well, it's because what I said just at the initial part of this interview is that the way our brains are programmed to look to the most confident, outspoken, domineering person and to say, hey, well, that looks like leadership material, and to put them and promote them into leadership positions. And then when they get into a leadership position, we're like, oh my gosh, they're the worst. They never ask me what, for my opinion on how to do things. They're always telling me what to do, and blaming me for problems. And so we have, as a society, we tend to promote people to leadership positions based on the, in many cases, which is the exact opposite behaviors that make for good leaders. So we promote people, based on these things that in fact turn out to make them not good leaders. And so if we continue to just go on our gut feel, we're going to continue to have too few good leaders and a lot of bad managers in leadership positions. So we need to get specific about what are the behaviors that in fact elevate other people. What are the behaviors that help organizations accomplish a common goal? Figure out what those behaviors are, and then promote people based on those behaviors.
So how do you hold people accountable for more than just hitting the sales numbers? Because it always seems that's all anybody really cares about at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think, a lot of people who have worked in a company where the salespeople are compensated 100% on commission, I think that anybody who has worked in that kind of an organization can testify to the dysfunction of 100%. The dysfunctional behavior that 100% commission produces within an organization, because they're going to do nothing. It just promotes complete self-interest at the expense of the interest of the company and at the expense of, in many cases, their teammates. And so, the way that you encourage people to be accountable beyond simply hitting the sales numbers is to start off with what are those behaviors, identify what are the behaviors that we want in our organization, identify those and make those the promotion criteria, and say, hey, if you want to get ahead in this organization, you got to be demonstrating these behaviors. And you also have to make that part of their compensation package, is that we're not just going to, and how we evaluate your performance is not simply on that. But it also goes back to, what is the focus? What are the leaders talking about all the time? Most of the time when we go to meetings and the senior leadership are talking about things, they're usually talking about the numbers. Well, guess what? If you're always talking about the numbers and not talking about behaviors that produce the numbers, you're going to get people who are solely focused on producing the numbers at the expense of the behaviors, and the expense of your teammates, and at the expense of the company. And so to me, it's like, look, identify what those key behaviors are that lead to successful outcomes, that elevate others, that accomplish a common goal, make those the promotion criteria, talk about those things, and reward people based on those behaviors, and stop focusing so much on the numbers when you're leading these meetings.
What's the difference between responsibility and accountability?
Well, if you take that example of sales, a salesperson is responsible to hit the sales numbers, but they're also accountable to do their paperwork. So they're not handing off incomplete paperwork to the operations people to fulfill those orders. The difference between accountability and responsibility is look, responsibility is task focused. It's, what are my list of things that I need to do? And if I can check those things off, I'm a responsible person, okay? Accountability is about results. What kind of results am I producing? So, and that's really the key difference. And the problem is in many organizations, we have accidentally over-focused people on responsibility at the expense of accountability. And the reason the way we do that, a lot of people in HR will do this. You think about a job description, how's a job description written? Is it written in terms of tasks and activities, or is it written in terms of outcomes? It's written in terms of usually tasks and activities. And what the problem is that we can be so focused, we all know this, that you can do all the right things and still get the wrong results.
Absolutely.
If you don't care about the results. And so the point is accountability is more caring about the results than caring about the activities to get the results. And so, and I tell you what, that one distinction, when I teach CEOs this concept, it's like this light bulb goes off and they're like, oh yeah, we have been over-focusing people on do this, do this, do this, do this. No, we don't hire people to do a list of activities. We hire people to get certain results. And so if you simply focus people on the results, you're actually freeing up their creativity to be able to figure out, to problem solve around obstacles. But if you say, do this, and I encounter an obstacle and, well, I can't do this, I'm done. That's responsibility. You know what? You told me to do this, but I couldn't do it, so I'm done. But if you say, look, Michael, I don't care how you do it, I just need you to get this kind of result, then I will problem solve. When I hit these obstacles, I'll figure out a way around it, because my goal is not simply to do the task, it's to get the result. And that is really the kind of the first step in creating a culture of accountability, is to help people focus on less on responsibility, more on accountability, more on the results of what we're trying to accomplish.
It's funny when you talk about, especially in sales or even product development, if they don't hit their sales goal, then instead of saying, I wonder why they didn't hit the sales goal, was it effort, was it product, was it price, what exactly is it? But immediately they want to get rid of the salesperson and put the blame on the salesperson, instead of digging in and even talking to the customers and finding out, what could we do actually better? Because I know John or Mary is working really hard here. I can't understand why they're not getting the results, as opposed to, oh, we better get somebody else in that spot. And how often do you see that's the case, where they really just don't even essentially take the management doesn't take responsibility, that maybe the product isn't that good, or it's just overpriced, or whatever.
Or maybe I'm not supporting this person as well as I should. And I think that it goes back to what you talked about earlier about people being too quick to pull the trigger. And I think, hey, look, if you need to err on the side of pulling the trigger too early, or too quickly, or too late, it's better to invest in humanity, invest in the human being, and say, you know what? And again, it goes back to habit number 2 of personal accountability, which is look in the mirror. If Mary isn't hitting her sales numbers, am I setting Mary up to succeed, or am I setting Mary up to fail? And I guarantee you, as a manager, when you have performance problems, most managers don't look in the mirror when they have performance problems with the people that they're leading. They immediately think, well, there must be something wrong with that person. Other people can do it. And maybe other people can do it because they have different talents, different strengths, or whatever. But they say, hey, or most managers don't take a look and say, am I actually setting this person up for success? What could I do differently to help Mary be more successful? Which includes the way I interact with her, my management meet or our one-on-one meetings, but also the processes that we have put in place. Are those actually supporting Mary or not, right? Those are things that people should be looking at.
I once worked with a doctor's practice where they elevated the bookkeeper to the manager of the practice, and she failed terribly. And they were going to fire her. And I'm like, fire her because you put her in the wrong position?
Right.
She's a bookkeeper. I mean, that's her skill set. You could have said, hey, let's put you in an interim basis, see how it works out. If it doesn't, you put her back to being the bookkeeper. But I said, you're going to fire her after 30 years of service because you made a mistake. It never occurred to them. So I said, you need to admit to the practice that you made a mistake. And they did. And they said, the people started crying, that the fact that they actually admitted that they made this big mistake, and they didn't want to see her go, just not to be the office manager for it. So I think it was a learned lesson for everybody, that you can admit that, hey, you put the person in the wrong position, then that's why they didn't make it.
That's a cool story. Thanks for sharing that.
How does a leader develop a culture of accountability when most people fear making a mistake will embarrass them or cost them their job? I think that's like a huge problem.
Well, that is that's why habit number one of personal accountability is don't blame. And that one behavior is one of the greatest ways that you can create psychological safety within the organization. If people are not afraid of getting beat up for and shamed and having the nose rubbed in their mistakes, they're going to be far more willing to say, oh yeah, you know what, Mark, that was totally my bad. I totally screwed that up. And here's what I'm going to do to fix this. And that's precisely the behavior that we're after in the organization. But it is interesting that in my practice, when I taught this for so long, I can see the cause and effect so clearly between people, employees' lack of willingness to take accountability and the culture of blame that exists. And it's so funny when I highlight this link to CEOs, it's like, oh my gosh, like again, like this light bulb goes off. Like, do we actually have this culture of blame? Now, the CEO is going to be the last really to know if they have a culture of blame. A lot of people are looking to their behavior, and we're not very aware of our own behavior. And so that's really why I work a lot of times with kind of the senior managers, because it really starts with them. They need to stop blaming other people and circumstances for problems. They need to model looking in the mirror and saying, you know what, this is how I think I contributed to the problem. It's not 100% my fault. It's not 100% your fault. But I think each one of us maybe, have probably done or didn't do things that led to where we are now. And here are the things that we can change. That is accountability. And it needs to start from the top, and it needs to be modeled from the top before we can expect anybody else to model that.
How are people that say that something isn't their problem holding themselves and their organization from success? And you talk a lot about that in the book.
Yeah, it's this it's not my problem attitude. And that is really the antithesis of accountability. It goes back to responsibility versus accountability. Are we over focusing people on tasks? If you are focusing people on tasks, then you're going to get a lot of that. It's not my problem. It's not on my list. This weird thing that happened, that caused this problem of things that I should be doing. So it's not my problem. And it's management, it creates this, it's not my problem mentality. By over focusing people on their scope of responsibility. So that's the first thing. But again, it goes back to, I'm sorry, I'm going to sound like a broken record here. It goes back to leaders need to model the way. Leaders need to, I share an example of leaders need to pitch in and do the work, the not glamorous work. To show people, hey, we are all in this together. And if I see a piece of trash on the ground, I'm going to pick it up. If I see a safety hazard, I'm going to deal with it. I'm not going to tell the safety manager. I'm just going to fix it, right? I don't care if I'm the CEO, the chief operating officer. Leaders need to model the way. They need to model the behavior of rolling up their sleeves, doing the not glamorous work to say, hey, look, it's not in my job description to empty the trash, but I'm going to do it because it needs to get done, and nobody else is around. Everybody else is busy, whatever. So it really starts with helping people understand the difference between responsibility and accountability. Helping people understand, what is your job? Your job is not simply to do this list. It's to achieve these results, and it's modeling the way and doing those things. As a matter of fact, I heard an employee one time complain to me. She said, our manager, it was at a small medical office, and she said our manager brought us all together at lunch, at the lunch hour, to complain to us that there was a box left by the back door all morning. And he said, none of you people picked it up. And this employee, she turned to me and she's like, you know what? I watched my boss walk past that box 5 times that morning without picking it up himself. So why should we be expected to do the little things when he is not willing to? And that is precisely why so many organizations have a lack of accountability, is because they don't have great leaders who are modeling the way.
Please explain the concept of systems thinking and how does one develop that skill?
Systems thinking, the best book, you might have heard of Peter Senge and his, I think I'm pronouncing his last name right, but in his book, The Fifth Discipline. And I read that, I don't know, 20, 25 years ago or something like that. And it really resonated with me. And that's, he really popularized the idea of systems thinking, which is looking beyond the easy solution or the most obvious, or what we think is the problem, and looking a little bit, thinking a little bit harder and looking a little bit deeper. The most common need, I think, for systems thinking is the way that our brains work. They actually work in the most efficient manner possible, which is kind of shallow thinking. And the way that this manifests in the workplace is that when we see a problem, or at home, by the way, anytime that we encounter a problem, what happens is our amygdala, anytime we see a problem, we interpret something as a problem, it triggers our amygdala. And our amygdala is programmed to tell us to find the person, not the thing, the person closest to the mess, and blame them for it. And if we can just get a stick and just beat them harder, we'll fix the problem. And that's really shallow thinking. When in fact, I'd say, so to answer your question, how do you develop this idea of systems thinking, is to notice when your amygdala is prompting you to blame the person closest to the mess. When you notice that, that's your kind of yellow flag to say, hey, hang tight. There might be something behind this. There might be something else, less obvious, that's really contributing to this problem. And so if you want to develop a systems thinking mindset, I think that's the easiest thing you can do, is just notice when you're prompted to blame somebody. And here's another phrase. If you ever think or hear the words, well, you just should be more careful. If that's your solution, that's not a sustainable solution. But if you think the words or say the words, you should be more careful, that's kind of your trigger to say, you know what, there's probably something else. There's probably a system. There's probably something about the process, the work process, that's contributing to this problem. I'll give you a quick example. So there was 3 people working so as my assistant and myself. We noticed that one of our templates, one of our survey templates, was deleted, and so I knew that I didn't delete it. My assistant, she knew that she didn't delete it, but there was one other person, and we knew that only one other person had access to these templates. Had to have been her. So my assistant was like, "I'm gonna, murder her or whatever." Because it wasn't the end of the world, but it was a really annoying. It was a problem because we didn't have any other copies of it, and so I said, hang tight. Let's just follow the 3 habits of personal accountability. Let's take a breather. Let's not blame. Let's look in the mirror. Did we do anything to make it easier for Mel to delete that? And as soon as we asked the question, both of us admitted, I almost accidentally deleted one of our templates. And she's like, I almost accidentally deleted. Well, why did we almost accidentally delete one of our templates? It's because our templates were mixed in with our work in process. And so that led us to habit number 3, which is engineer the solution, which is come up with a systems solution. Simple systems solution is to create a folder called templates and put our templates in that folder away from our work in process, so that we wouldn't accidentally delete it. Because we could have just, oh, well, you just need to be more careful, right? That's the solution. Be more careful. Well, or we could put some sort of safety mechanisms in place to make it harder to make the wrong decision. And that's an example of a very common thing that happens in the workplace, where we haven't done the basic things to prevent people from making mistakes.
You had this great graphic, I liked it, about differences between managers and leaders. It's on page 45. you called garbage. Why did you write that? Aren't managers mostly implementers and leaders visionaries? Like it's kind of like Steve Jobs versus Tim Cook.
Yeah, a lot of people love, love like, oh, managers push, leaders pull, managers are focused on the details, leaders are focused on the high level thinking. That to me is garbage because to be an effective leader, you also have to be aware of the details. You have to be a good operational person as well. And the reason why we think that all great leaders are these Steve Jobs visionaries is the same reason that we think that parents think that kidnappers are lurking around every corner. It's because those are what make headlines. When in fact, the best leaders that I know, they're not necessarily great visionaries. Of course, you have to have some kind of high level visionary thinking to be an effective leader, but they're not amazing visionaries. But they are really good at elevating other people, and they're really good at helping other people to accomplish a common goal. They don't make headlines necessarily, and I think the world is full of a lot of really good leaders who don't make headlines, who are not great visionaries. And you know who else doesn't make headlines? Is all of the business failures. Think about all of the businesses that fail. I would be willing to bet that a lot of the businesses that fail are full of great visionaries at the head that cannot operationalize and cannot figure out how to crank out a profit. And so I think the reason why we have this false idea that to be a great leader you have to be this amazing visionary is just simply because those are the ones that grab the headlines, and it's giving us a false perception of reality.
Although I have to say that combination of Jobs and Cook together really was offense and defense on a football team. They did a great job when they were together. And complementary skills.
Yeah, and for sure. And actually, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I just wanted to say, look, you can be an effective leader, regardless of what your strengths are. I think you can be an effective leader. And I think, most people can see that have been in an organization for a long time, that have had a number of effective leaders. You can see, yeah, this person was an effective leader. And then this other person who came in, they were also an effective leader, but they had a completely different skill set, completely different strengths, right? And that can work as long as you have other people there to help compensate for your weaknesses, that you have systems and processes to compensate for your weaknesses, and it can work great. But I just think we're doing ourselves a disservice by buying into this false notion that you have to be this visionary and sitting up on this 30,000 foot level, not aware of the details. That's not reality.
You write people apply two types of influences: coercion and leadership. That sounds like Putin versus Zelensky. What can leaders learn from this?
Yeah. So coercion versus, sorry, what did you say?
Coercion versus and leadership.
Yeah, coercion versus leadership. So leadership is about influencing and inspiring people to a cause. Coercion is about carrots and sticks, and that's really the way that a lot of leaders only rely on carrots and sticks. Now, accountability, there has to be consequences to your actions. Okay, so yes, consequences are part of accountability. But they're not the only part of accountability. They're not the only thing to create this culture of accountability. They're a very small part of creating this culture of accountability. But the difference, and you can see that in the difference. Certainly, when we were getting the reports at the beginning of the war, we kept hearing the morale of the Russian troops was just brutal. And they were, because they were kept in the dark. They were lied to. They knew they were lied to, and they were being threatened. If you don't do this, bad things are going to happen. And so that's going to kill morale. Zelensky, it's pretty easy to rally everybody around a common goal when the whole nation's life is at risk. That will mobilize people pretty quickly. But I think the one key thing that Zelensky did that it just endeared him to the whole world, to his nation and the whole world, and immediately vaulted him to the level of, wow, he's a great leader, is when the US offered him a ride out.
Yes.
And he said, I don't need a ride, I need weapons. And the whole world was like, wow, that guy is willing. Okay, and we immediately notice when somebody is willing to take a personal risk for the greater good. And we respect that, right? Intuitively, we respect that. And I think that was that key moment where we realized he is not about putting himself above his people. In fact, he's going first. He's like, look, if the first person, if somebody needs to die, it's going to be me. That's a huge, and the CEOs, we're not asking our CEOs to die, but we are asking them to sacrifice sometimes their ego, to sacrifice face, and admit when they've made mistakes. People respect that when they see it, and they immediately like, that is a great leader. And I think that's the difference. And I think people are like, yeah, I want to be more like Zelensky, because that showed tremendous courage.
Yeah, I give him all the kudos, because we saw the leader of Afghan run out as fast as he could. As soon as the U.S. offered him a plane out, he goes, my bags are packed, I'm ready to go.
Yeah,
and
somebody else do the hard work.
Yeah, and the country folded in 2 weeks, right, even having a 6 to 10 to 1 advantage and everything, and they still folded very, very quickly. There was an interesting study you mentioned on blaming others for mistakes done by a Harvard researcher, Amy Edmondson. Could you please talk about that study and what we can learn from it?
Yeah, Amy Edmondson, she's done a lot of research around blame in the workplace, and psychological safety really is her area of focus. And she's worked a lot in hospitals. This was a hospital study. And it's interesting, she was looking at the rate of reporting safety incidents. And she expected that, so what she would do is she would evaluate the leadership, she'd do a leadership evaluation, and then she would look at the numbers as far as how many safety incidents are being reported. What she expected is that, there'd be a poor safety record with the poor leadership. But she found the precise opposite, that the safety record, as far as measured in number of incidents reported, was much higher with the good leaders, the better leaders. And it kind of dawned on her at that point, oh, it's because people are more willing to say, I screwed up. That was a mistake. And we need to put something, I need people to know about it so that we don't make that same mistake. So that nobody else makes that mistake, because people's lives are at stake here. But you see this, these people in these high-powered positions, these doctors who, we hear about the doctors, the God complex. I know everything. You nurses are the peons. And when people make mistakes, what are you doing? How could you do that? Right? Well, flip. I'm never going to admit a mistake if it means that I'm going to be blamed or shamed or possibly lose my job. And that's exactly what that study discovered.
Michael, thank you so much for taking the time today to be with us. I love the book. I hope people will be buying the book. And I thought you did a great job of covering all these great topics that we as leaders have to think about, and that you have to think about putting your people first and how to maximize their potential. And hence why there's got to be a lot of bad leaders when 37% of people are not happy. Only 37% are happy with their jobs. So there's a lot of work to be done, and hopefully your book's going to contribute to that. Thanks so much, Mark, for having me on the show. I appreciate it. Well, enjoy your weekend, everybody. We'll look forward to seeing you all next week. Take care. Bye-bye.